are about to take part in a time-traveling road trip through pop culture. A road trip with a clear destination and many stops along the way. This is but one act of one chapter of the serialized journey.
So if any of you feel that you do not care to subject your nerves to such a strain, now is your chance to, well, we've warned you.
Why don't they look?
When we last left off, Mike Nelson, Crow T-Robot, Tom Servo, and Gypsy suffered the first and last experiments from the team of Golan and Globus and their shady Cannon group. We discussed Kathy Ireland's voice, Jack Palance's disinterest, and took not one, but two detours involving Kurt Russell. This week we'll discuss the last movies from creature and beginner Bert I. Gordon to be riffed on the show, take a trip to Hooterville, offer sacrifices to the holiest of entities, Radar, and get even closer to the conclusion of MST3K's 5th season, a season of transition. As always, I am Ryan Rodriguez, and this is the Coolness Chronicles Season 1, The History and Legacy of Mystery Science Theater 3000.
Tonight's episode...
Chapter 8, A Smooth Transition. Act 3, Big Bugs, Rogue Narrators, and Radar! While Roger Corman has the notable distinction of having the most produced films featured on MST3K, topping off at 14 experiments, as a director he was only responsible for 6. The man who stands over him? Bert I. Gordon, with 8 movies. We've covered 6 so far from seasons 2 through 4, King Dinosaur, The Amazing Colossal Man, Earth vs. the Spider, War of the Colossal Beast, Tormented, and The Magic Sword, and his last 2 involuntary contributions to the show aired in the second half of the 5th season. Gordon, who's at age 96 is still active in the industry, is primarily, but not solely, known as a director who specializes in giant creature movies, with effects crudely executed by utilizing actual animals in miniature sets, or usually just postcard or picture backgrounds, added to the frame using rear projection. As Mike put it so plainly, Gordon was one of the premier
Pioneers in really big stuff.
As I noted in earlier chapters, if he ever achieved a seamless effect, I'm not aware of it. I've often wondered if I were born in the 1950s and in his target demographic, I'm assuming young children who, at least in my own case, are usually delighted to be in a theater and therefore not terribly discerning, would be impressed or scared by his effects. I would assume not, because even in a time of rudimentary technology, a Japanese man in a lizard suit is inherently more cinematic than an aimless grasshopper in front of a picture of a building in downtown Chicago. This is a perfect segue into the first Gordon movie of the season, Experiment 517, 1957's Beginning of the End.
We may be witnessing the beginning of an era that will mean the complete annihilation of man.
Annihilation?
The beginning of the end.
A menace so massive, so overwhelming, that thousands upon thousands are propelled into senseless terror. Panic takes the place of planned evacuation, and whole cities are paralyzed by fear.
The Air Force is standing by with an atom bomb.
You can't drop an atom bomb on Chicago.
While most Gordon-directed movies are lackluster but at least demonstrate a modicum of effort, Beginning of the End is a bargain basement affair that carries a heavy ethos of, did we get the shot? Barely, we could use a second take. Moving on! Two-time MST3K featured actress Peggy Castle, best known according to Wikipedia as, quote, an actress who specialized in playing the other woman in B-movies, end quote, stars as Audrey Ames, a persistent photojournalist who is driving through Illinois. She is stopped at a military roadblock on the outskirts of the town of Ludlow, a town of 150 people that has been mysteriously destroyed, and every question she asks is rebuffed and avoided. She goes directly to the National Guard's home office, where she's basically told by the commanding officer not to pursue the mystery for fear of mass hysteria. She also learns that the fields in Ludlow have been completely decimated in a locust-like fashion. She contacts her boss at the National Wire Service, who puts her on the trail of the Department of Agriculture, headed by Dr. Wainwright, played by Peter Graves. The department has been experimenting with atomic radiation in order to end world hunger by producing unholy massive fruits and vegetables, because radiation and food for humans are natural bedfellows. Dr. Graves reveals that a nearby grain silo storing radioactive wheat has been devoured by locusts, the consequences of which are quite clear when a locust the size of a bus eats his fellow researcher. The National Guard is skeptical of these supposed perversions of nature, probably because even though our lead character is a photojournalist, she neglects to act like one whenever around the locust menace.
Hey, Diane Arbus, why don't you take a picture?
Hey.
You got a camera?
We'll send help. Bye-bye.
Dr. Peter Graves convinces the head honcho of the Guard to at least take a squad to the site of his colleagues' munching, which leads to a battle in a forest between the overwhelmed troops and a sizable amount of additional mutant locusts. This is around the point in the movie when Audrey stops being a character and is just in the frame in certain scenes, occasionally speaking words of no consequence. These bugs, having exhausted all the local crops, have become bloodthirsty and are roaming the Illinois countryside looking for humans to consume. Soon, the National Guard calls in the rest of the army to deal with these supersized pests. Despite their best efforts and biggest guns, the military is ultimately ineffectual against the creatures. This doesn't stop Director Gordon from padding out his film, however, showing redundant shot after redundant shot of soldiers firing their futile weapons at the beasts, as well as lots of World War II stock footage with benign-looking grasshoppers awkwardly superimposed into the frame. It's at this point that the movie basically becomes Starship Troopers, minus the satire, or the story, or the interest. Soon, those grasshoppers, or locusts, or whatever, have taken Chicago, laying waste to still photographs of empty streets, climbing buildings that are clearly horizontal postcards made vertical optically in post-production, and reenacting that scene in King Kong where the big monkey paws at a scantily dressed lady, minus the fun or the effort.
They are radically altering their size depending on your perspective.
This total lack of consideration for integration of grasshopper footage into scenes with actors is best exemplified in a scene where, after being gassed by Dr. Peter Graves, a caged locust is made to look like it's a test subject in a large room, with people passing in front of it periodically. While Mike and the bots get in plenty of jailed grasshopper jokes.
You're dead, Graves. I've got friends. This is a dead man I'm looking at.
Well, it looks like you were having a pretty good time for yourself out in Peoria last night, eh, Hoppy?
Have you ever associated with crickets? Have you ever taken part in a plague? Have you eaten crops in excess of $1 million?
The placement of the rear projection screen containing the caged bug makes it very clear that the actors are interacting with a blank wall. This is amplified whenever the locust gets a leg around a bar, something that could easily kill someone if they were in the same room, but instead gives away the flat, two-dimensional effect. When the military proposes nuking Chicago to eliminate the menace, Dr. Peter Graves proposes a more human alternative, playing an amplified mating call over loudspeakers and getting the locusts to drown themselves in Lake Michigan. Sidebar. According to the internet, the production started with 200 grasshoppers, but since they began to eat each other during filming, they ended with only a dozen. Some were also dispatched during shots of grasshoppers struggling in what looks like a tiny tank of water. I suppose I'm trying to say that many grasshoppers were harmed during the making of this picture, so everyone loses, the audience and the insects. End sidebar. When the movie ends, Dr. Peter Graves is wondering about the future and passionately embracing Audrey, because, I forgot to mention, every male character spends any scene they share with her desperately trying to nail her, and he is the most successful. This makes me wonder, though, why is the movie called Beginning of the End when it actually ends? All the grasshoppers have drowned, so what more end is there? Only Chicago is destroyed and no more giant creatures are around that anyone is aware of. Seems relatively conclusive to me. For all its faults, there's one redeeming factor in the movie. Almost every off-camera dialogue involving military personnel is performed by the Coolness Chronicles' favorite voiceover artist.
Until further notice, all traffic will continue to be routed around the Ludlow area according to special orders.
The second and final Bert I. Gordon Giant Thing Film Fest of the season and the series is admittedly a leap forward filmmaking-wise and a few steps back in every other department, 1965's Village of the Giants.
This is just the beginning of the wildest, weirdest adventure you've ever seen. Now, anything goes. And everything grows. And this is where the fun really began.
I wonder if this makes everything grow. Hey, will you cut it out and leave it alone, huh?
Listen, Freddy boy, if I want to try some of this stuff, just don't you try and stop me, understand?
It's wild. It's way out. It's Village of the Giants.
Before we get to the actual story, what little there is, let's address one of the cool things about the movie. Quentin Tarantino is clearly a fan, at least of the soundtrack. And if you've ever seen the opening credits to Village of the Giants and Tarantino's half of Grindhouse, the main theme will sound very familiar. But the second that awesome composition fades from your speakers, we're thrust into a movie that could easily be retitled, Bert I. Gordon Just Doesn't Get Kids Today. A bunch of good-for-nothing randy teenagers led by a young Beau Bridges crash their car into a telephone pole just outside a small California town during a brightly lit rainstorm. They then tumble out of the vehicle and begin having a sensual group go-go dance / mud wrestle that lasts for what feels like 5 minutes.
Couldn't they have used all this time to show short scenes of their growing discontent with society's mores?
Well, got a lot of wet boob shots in.
Hey.
Hard cut to two teenagers, non-character Nancy and her boyfriend Mike, played by teen imploded superstar Tommy Kirk, having a very light, chaste makeout session before being interrupted by Nancy's little brother Genius, played by little Ronnie Howard. Genius, who conducts dangerous affront-to-nature experiments in the basement, completely unsupervised, more on this later, accidentally develops a pink gack-like substance called goo. When Genius's dog consumes some of the goo, he grows to at least 10 times his regular size, which gives Mike an idea. Feed it to the other animals that they neither own nor are familiar with, some random ducks, because ducks never display difficult temperaments that can be exacerbated by increased size. Naturally, the ducks become huge off-camera with the aid of some goofy side effects, and the kids immediately stop paying attention to them, so they waddle away. Sidebar. Since this is clearly a town and not a village, shouldn't the movie be called Town of the Giants? I know it doesn't roll off the tongue quite as well, but it's certainly more accurate. End sidebar. The ducks end up waddling into the hippest club in town, which just so happens to be the first stop of the roving up-to-no-good teenagers from the early mud-soaked WrestleMania. Everyone is enchanted by these ducks, and nobody questions how they got into the cramped building without being noticed or destroying anything. Mike, being an opportunist piece of crap, immediately takes credit for these abominations, but refuses to divulge his secret means of creating them. The wicked teens take notice of this and begin to half-wittedly scheme, and the rest of those in attendance wonder aloud, what's up with the damn ducks?
How do you like those ducks?
Oh, good line. Stupid.
Barbecue. That's how I like them.
Wacky hard cut to a huge plucked duck being slow roasted on a spit in a large picnic area.
Thanks for providing the transition.
The entire town shows up to eat the ducks, and frustratingly, at no point is it ever communicated or shown how the ducks were killed. Considering their supersize, it had the potential to be great Technicolor cinematic slaughter, and certainly couldn't be more distasteful than that opening mud wrestling. Later that evening, Beau Bridges' teen squad breaks into Genius's lab and steals his remaining supply of goo. They retreat to a massive minimum 500-seat theater, quite large for your average village, and quickly forget about selling the substance, devolving into standard hepcat peer pressure.
Scared?
Yeah, he's scared.
No, I just got more sense, that's all. You always said you wanted to be a big man. Now's your chance.
I see what
yeah,
you mean,
real
Gary.
Big man. Unless you're scared.
Show him, Fred. Show him that you're not no chicken.
Hey, will you cut it out?
The Reader's Theater version of Noises Off.
Yeah, that's a wild idea, man.
Chicken, huh?
Are you? Marie? Are you out of your mind?
Hey, will you cut it out and leave it alone, huh?
Listen, Freddie boy, if I want to try some of this stuff, just don't you try and stop me, understand?
Suddenly, the evil teens expand, outgrowing their clothes and becoming giant, hence the title, Small Town of the Giants. It's then that they suddenly take on an anti-authoritarian bent and decide to free the town from the shackles of adult supremacy, even though, up to this point, there are no adults in town. Nobody supervising geniuses tampering in God's domain, or the swinging nightclub, not even the big duck rotisserie. It's like a less charming Children of the Corn. The giant teens make their presence known to the quote-unquote village by using the theater's massive curtains as makeshift togas, so as not to be indecent, and shaking their dinners for a good 12 minutes. Maybe it's like how wild animals assert their dominance by go-go dancing at one another? I'm not sure, but I'm damn sure Bert I. Gordon has no clue. This is when the first adults show up, and they're cops to boot. They tell the teens to go back to their theater and await further instructions, which the giant teens reject. After threatening to squish the sheriff and knocking Mike out cold, so they're not all bad, they retreat to the theater, effectively doing what they're told. Off-screen, according to Wikipedia, the Giants have ripped out telephone lines, overturned broadcasting antennas, and blocked the remaining roads out of town. Whether this was shot and cut for MST3K or just badly implied isn't quite clear, but I can tell you that it doesn't seem to affect the narrative in any way. When the sheriff and, for some reason, Mike meet up at the theater to confront the Giants, they reveal that they're holding the sheriff's daughter hostage. How they knew where to find her, or even that she existed, considering their outsider status, is yet another mystery, but whatever. The Giants demand all the guns in town and basically turn the quote-unquote villagers into indentured servants responsible for keeping them flush with food and drink. While the cops, whom I assume are the only adults to be found in the entire village, turn tail and run, the local teens form a kind of rebel alliance and take the fight to the Giants. And by that, I mean Mike throws slings at Bow Bridges while teens on motorbikes try binding his fake hairy legs together with rope, not unlike The Empire Strikes Back. This manages to get all the Giants out of their theater hideout and into the open air of the town square. Sidebar. If you've ever seen any movie shot in a studio backlot, the town square might look very familiar, particularly the Hill Valley Clock Tower from Back to the Future, which was also the clock house. This ploy manages to get all of the Giants out of their theater hideout and into the open air of the town square. Sidebar. If you've ever seen any movie shot in a studio backlot, the town square might look very familiar, particularly the Hill Valley Clock Tower from Back to the Future, which was also the courthouse from To Kill a Mockingbird. While this piece of property is on the Universal lot, where you can see it every day on the backlot tour, the rest of the movie was shot on the Columbia backlot, which is now part of the Warner Ranch. End sidebar. Once the gang of Giants is out in the open and on the warpath, Genius has coincidentally developed a chemical that reverses the growth process, then somehow manufactures a dispersal method, attaches it to his bike, and rides over to the Giants and gasses them. The sheer amount of happenstance in the final 15 minutes is enough to give the viewer whiplash. The evil teens disembiggen and are restored to their original normal size, while their clothing, which was made out of giant curtains, manages to be just slightly ill-fitting. Instead of facing justice for kidnapping and terrorism and slavery, Mike punches Bow Bridges in the face, and the teens run back to their crashed car, where they're greeted by an off-screen voice.
Got a long walk.
Beg your pardon. Are you people coming from Haynesville?
Oh, you can call me Ray, or you can call me Ray.
Yes, we're coming from Haynesville.
Is that the place where they have the goo?
Yes, that's the place where they have the goo.
Thank you so much.
One last offensive thing to leave you with, folks.
The shamed cast of Terror of Tiny Town meets the shamed cast of Village of the Giants.
Shameful, huh? So, that's it? Wasn't much of a payoff. We waited all this time for that?
It was a bunch of little people. Get it? Ha 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 ha. Good one, Bert. Village of the Giants, in addition to being a real piece of crap, has the audacity to claim that it's based on the H.G. Wells novel The Food of the Gods.
Based on? Oh, in that they're both in English.
Could be based on Profiles in Courage.
Oh, by Theodore Sorensen?
Yes.
And having read the summary for the book, I can attest that the only things that they have in common are giant animals and giant people. Other than that, I'm sure that Wells's zombified remains would have quite an issue with that claim. It is worth noting, however, that 11 years after studio backlot of the Giants, Bert I. Gordon took yet another crack at the Wells novel, this time actually titled H.G. Wells's Food of the Gods. I didn't watch it because until the day I wrote this episode, I had no idea it existed. And despite the many, many bad movies I watched for future chapters, I simply had no drive whatsoever to track it down. A cursory glance at the synopsis suggests that Gordon chose to simply make another giant animal and insect movie, and I don't regret sitting that one out. And while Bert I. Gordon's movies are unquestionably terrible, the MST3K episodes built around them are superb. Beginning at the End, for instance, is packed with delightful host segments. The second sketch of the episode deals with Mike's increasing curiosity regarding his captors, and decides to use the communication panel on the SOL to call Deep 13 instead of the other way around. What he ends up seeing is a sweet and shocking reminder that the Mads are people too, and have become quite domesticated over the years.
I mean, I just think we should call them Mads. Why don't we call them Mads?
You know, my baby takes the morning train. She works till 9. Frank, I could not stop picking at that pan of lemon bars. I ate half the pan. You're so lucky you could eat anything and not worry.
Oh, Pshaw, I'd give anything to have that complexion of yours.
Oh, Frank.
Hey, wow! Vicky is on!
Oh. You know, Frank, this is exactly what I wanted to do today. Just have the whole day to ourselves.
I'm declaring this National Hour Day. Please, do not let me eat all of this.
Well, I shouldn't. Oh, my God, Frank, switch on the game, switch on the game!
The next host segment, however, is the piece de resistance of the episode, showcasing Trace Beaulieu's pitch-perfect Peter Graves impersonation when Crow writes a new, irritating screenplay based on Graves' alma mater, the University of Minnesota.
Act 1, Peter Graves enrolls at the University of Minnesota.
Okay, here we go. Hi, I'm the registrar. May I help you?
Yes, I'm Peter Graves, and I'd like to enroll at the University of Minnesota.
Act 2. Mike, you got to help me with the card.
Oh, right. Okay.
I don't have any. Thank you. Act 2. Peter Graves attends his first class.
Hi, I'm Peter Graves. Is this Biology 101?
Yes.
Good. I'm Peter Graves, and I'm in the right class.
It goes on for another minute as Servo and Mike, but mostly Servo, get increasingly tired of the script's premise. I'd play the whole thing, but you get the picture. The riffing is predictably top-notch, as I proved earlier in the episode, and one offhand riff in particular led to 2 detours.
Right.
Well, these days they blame the atom for everything. Bad health, bad crops, bad weather.
Bad lieutenant.
Now it's grasshoppers.
So let's pause this little road trip and head back 1 year to 1992 to discuss Abel Ferrara's most fucked up 96 minutes, Bad Lieutenant.
Jay Scott of the Toronto Globe and Mail claims, every so often, the limits of screen acting are redefined and expanded. Harvey Keitel has given the kind of performance a generation is defined by.
How you doing? I got 2 young girls. Shot in the head twice each. I don't know if they're still wearing the rounds in the head or what.
Bruce Williamson of Playboy calls it a dark morality play with shock value to spare. Bad Lieutenant spells out themes of hypocrisy and sexual obsession with the intensity of a nightmare.
Just put $120,000 on tomorrow's game. This guy will come by your house and blow your house up with your wife and kids and everybody in it. You know that, right? No one can kill me. I'm blessed.
Jamie Bernard of the New York Post exults. Skillful and unforgettable, Keitel does some amazing work.
There's nothing to think about. Either you put in my bet
Oh, you get nothing.
Roger Ebert of At the Movies says, Bad Lieutenant is my own choice as the best discovery of the Cannes Film Festival.
Come on, give us a break.
You do something for me, and I'll do something for you. What do you say about that?
Peter Travers of Rolling Stone magazine acclaims, Harvey Keitel whacks you like the business end of a Louisville slugger. It's a powerhouse performance in a film of jabbing intensity and wit. Bad Lieutenant.
What else you say, Mr. Badass?
It won't come as a surprise to anyone listening to this, but I'm into some weird shit. Not like Donkey Show weird, or like Twin Peaks The Return weird. And in my pursuit of finding said weird shit, I've had some truly harrowing film-going experiences. Bad Lieutenant is high up on the list of experiences that shook me to my core, and I'm glad I saw it, but I wish I could scrub some of the imagery from my brain. Harvey Keitel plays the lieutenant, a bad man. Surprise! Imagine if Training Day was about a cop driving around the daily beat, terrorizing himself instead of a rookie officer. That's this film. Actually, I take that back. A film has a story. This is a character study about a man who wakes up in the morning, drops his kids off at Catholic school, clocks in, destroys his life and wounds others, self-implodes, shoots up heroin or smokes some crack, becomes immobilized and eventually unconscious, then wakes up the next morning and repeats the cycle. He just so happens to engage in plot threads on occasion. It is 100% its own soul-wrenching thing that feels like black magic. It should not be, but yet it is, and it dares you to look away or leave the theater. And it contains a scene that, in light of some recent definitely true allegations against Harvey Weinstein, is especially loathsome and evil and hard to watch, but is also entirely in character and logical. I won't elaborate simply because I don't want to, but if you can stomach the worst humanity can inflict on itself without a physical violation, it's there waiting for you. This scene in particular is why when, in 2009, when a new Werner Herzog movie was announced with the same title, I was floored. There's no way you can remake or sequelize this film.
Who's that? Please, get me out of here.
You want me to get wet on account of you? Hey, man, I got on Swiss cotton underpants.
I'm gonna drown, sir.
Come on, we'll get the time of death from autopsy.
Please!
Come on, man. He ain't worth it. You are crazy. Come on.
You okay?
The good news, Terrence, is I'll okay you to return to full duty. The bad news is that you'll be experiencing moderate to severe back pain.
Recognition of his leadership and tenacity, Lieutenant Terrence McDonough.
This is who we're looking for. Name is Donald Godshaw. You up to this?
Why wouldn't I be?
Still having problems with your back? You taking medication for it?
Only what the doctor prescribes. Got any illegal substances on you?
Big mistake.
Who are you?
I'm Dave, the guy you robbed. To make it right, you gotta come up with $50,000. Don't make me look for you, Terrence.
What are these iguanas doing on my coffee table?
There ain't no iguana.
Yeah, there are.
There ain't no iguana.
Where's the 15,000?
Put that gun away.
Kill all of you. To the break of dawn, baby.
You know the people are friendly there.
Do you think these guys care you're a cop?
Shoot him again.
What for?
His soul's still dancing.
Back at home.
And so, this isn't a sequel or a remake. Though it follows a similar arc to Bad Lieutenant, this is about a completely different and much more broadly defined cop, played by Nicolas Cage. Like Harvey Keitel, he's a heroin fiend, has a lucky crack pipe, and owes money to many an unsavory bookie. But Port of Call, New Orleans is much more of a traditional film that takes turns into character study territory. Cage can always be depended upon to add more than a dash of insanity to whatever he's in, and he really doesn't hold back here, adding a manic energy that Keitel neglected to display. Depending on the scene, he's either a grinning and sinister devil or playing a more reserved version of Tony Clifton. Here's Cage.
The boys want to saddle her up, just in the spirit of friendliness. You mind?
Well, let her get cleaned up, put on something hot. She looks like shit right now.
Beautiful, beautiful.
What are you waiting for?
Now, I don't want to put any pressure on you, but she has a client coming over in 15 minutes. You boys can be done by then, right?
And Clifton.
Let's get something straight, people. I play a lot of the big showrooms in Vegas. I need this place like I need a shotgun blast to the face. Now let's go down and meet some of the audience. All right. Hey, how y'all doing? Where are you from? Yeah. Whoa! Somebody's wearing a lot of perfume around here.
It's an overall hallucinatory experience, sometimes attributable to entire minutes of Herzog dicking around with a digital camera like he just discovered they existed, and would make for a great double feature with the previous film if you absolutely hate yourself. And, not to be undersold, I learned a new curse word from it.
Please watch, shit turd.
I don't mean to criticize, but isn't that redundant? Although I chose to discuss both Bert I. Gordon movies together, they aired 2 months apart. Village of the Giants is the second to last episode of the 5th season, so by the time they had gotten to it, any bumps in the transition from Joel to Mike had been delicately sanded over, and the show was beginning to become more dense and more eager to try an overarching storyline. Where Wild Wild World of Batwoman mostly consisted of a story about Crow cheating on an essay contest, it only kicked in after the related short had finished. In this episode, the story begins right after the prologue. It involves TV's Frank getting fired from whatever he does other than pushing the button way down in Deep 13 and being replaced by Torgo. As the episode continues, jobless Frank lazily watches television in his underpants while Dr. Forrester tries to conduct business. He eventually takes refuge in a janitor's closet, even though Deep 13 doesn't have a janitor to my knowledge, and starts appearing on the hex field on the SOL to beg Mike and the bots to sign off on his unemployment paperwork. Taking pity on Frank, they decide to write a song for him and sing it in the hopes of inspiring him to shape up and get his job back from Torgo's oblivious clutches.
TV's Frank, this one's for you.
It's going out to our very special friend. Frank, the sun never shone upon our love before, until there was Frank.
You, from me to you, sweet floppy Frank. We've had a lifetime of Frank.
An endless Frank will always flow for all we know. For all we know. Frank, from the first day I knew your name, I never knew love was the same.
Never knew love was the same. Open to find sweet Frank on the line. Nothing but sweet love and Frank.
'Cause it's
Knowing that love
Frank.
could be frank, if only the sun and the moon would collide to be frank. Let me be frank about Frank. Let me be frank about Frank. Let me be frank about Frank.
'Cause Frank is the best Frank that's ever happened to me.
Please don't go.
Bye, Frank. You were enjoyed.
The song serves a dual purpose, which is revealed at the end of the credits, where the standard post-episode stinger is replaced with a lovely tribute to a different, late great Frank Zappa, who died the month before this episode aired. On a brighter note, Village of the Giants is a hard episode to pick favorite riffs from, mainly because it's so loaded back to front. So I'll focus on 2 recurring bits that definitely make it a keeper for me. First, there's Servo's dismay during the scene when the evil teens break into Genius's basement, as there is a shapely red gumball machine that he seems to find very familiar.
Mom? Mother? Oh, Mother. Oh, it's her. Mommy.
Let him have his fun.
My roots. Don't you touch. She cannot be bought for pocket change. What? Mom! Oh, no! She's putting out for a nickel. I have no mother. Oh.
But my favorite runner in the episode comes from an argument between Mike and Crow. You see, Mike takes every appearance of little Ronnie Howard as an opportunity to bash his film Willow, a stance that Crow is somewhat opposed to.
I wonder why it doesn't. You and I aren't going to be very compatible either, Genius, if you don't get out of here.
Hope that blows up in his face so I don't have to see Willow.
Hey, I like Willow.
Look at him, the little kid plotting against us with Willow.
I liked Willow.
Oh, you liked Kevin Pollak? You liked that?
Point taken.
Spiders don't growl, even that big.
No, I guess you really can't prove that when they're that big, they don't growl.
I liked Willow.
Wait a minute.
Well, hey, you know, Ron must have gotten directing tips from Bert I.
That's why he made Willow.
Hey, I liked Willow.
Ah, well, you would... Whoa.
Come on. The FX in Willow was better than this.
Hey, you liked Willow. As a lab partner, he's not much help.
Wolf, I have some quite astounding news for you.
Yeah, Willow sucked.
Gratuitously, perhaps.
Hey, now that was gratuitous.
We have discovered the antidote.
And this argument inspired the next detour, where we'll travel back to the magical year 1988 and discuss the Ron Howard-George Lucas collaboration, Willow.
From the creator of Star Wars, from the director of Cocoon, a world is awakening.
Why, with the strength of my great army, can you not find one little child?
It's a dangerous world. That's why we need your help.
Your journey has just begun.
Willow. Heroes come in all sizes. But adventure doesn't come any bigger than this.
Find the child. Find the child.
We are not afraid of you. After them!
You're gonna get us killed.
I trust them completely. The next great adventure.
You are great.
Willow. Coming in May.
I had actually never seen Willow until a few months ago, despite it being on my watch list for several years, but there's something I learned by watching it back-to-back with Dragon Slayer that confirmed what I had previously suspected. I don't like fantasy films. I don't know why, because I have a great respect for writer-conjured mythology. Religion? Not so much. But there's something about made-up worlds with no ties to the universe as I recognize it that simply disinterests me. It's not even dislike, it's just deep disinterest. I can understand why people love this movie. One of my very best friends absolutely adores it. And I find things in it to appreciate, like the effects from Industrial Light and Magic, which are from a time period before analog was completely enveloped by digital, and strong performances from the mostly dwarf actor cast like Star Warwick Davis, who's usually relegated to playing Ewoks and similar creatures, actually getting the chance to play characters without prosthetic makeup and with relatable human characteristics and feelings. I would drone on further and try to summarize the plot, but frankly, I don't remember much of it. I know there are wizards and magic and mythical creatures, but it all blurs together in the end. I will say that in terms of George Lucas productions, it ranks around the high point of the middle. I don't regret the 2 hours I spent, but I don't think I'll be replicating the experience anytime soon. The last two experiments we'll cover this week have a lot in common in terms of the movies they feature. Namely, there's not a lot to say about them. One of them is serviceable as an episode, and the other is one of my top 10 favorites, despite what little the SOL crew have to work with. Let's start with the lesser of the two. A movie shot in 10 days in 1958, but not released until 1963. Always a good sign. Experiment 518, The Atomic Brain.
Can death be outwitted? Is the secret of eternal life just around that corner? Today, medical science patches up mutilated bodies, transplanting human skin, eyes, limbs, even vital organs. Is the next step the transplantation of the human brain? Many scientists answer yes, but they pause and add a grim warning. For in the ancient folk legends, tales are told of blood-sucking vampires, crawling out of graves to live on the bodies of helpless victims. Is man now doomed to produce a race of ever-living monstrosities, worse than the vampires of legend? Will ruthless men and women of great wealth and power greedily buy or steal the living bodies of the young and beautiful, so their brains may live on forever? Such questions may seem fanciful, but at this very moment, scientists are working on the answer to brain transplantation. Has he found the way to outwit death? Or has he created another?
Originally titled Monstrosity, this is one of the rare revised movie names that is more appropriate than the original. How so? An old woman with money literally coming out of her ass has mad scientists build an atomic chamber in her basement, which they will use to transport her brain into the body of a younger, pretty woman. Why? Because she wants to be loved for who she is, not her money. And no, she never considers that maybe money and beauty is much more of a draw, therefore making her effort all the more pointless. So she and her staff hire 3 servant women from different foreign countries, played by actresses that are not from those countries.
Your mission, Mr. Phelps, should you decide to accept it, is to pick up these 3 foreign women at the L.A. International Airport. Should you or any of your
Yeah, it goes on like that, we know.
All right.
There's Anita from quote-unquote Spain, who ends up having her brain switched with that of a cat and eats a mouse. There's Nina, who's from a part of Austria where accents are inconsistent. And then there's the poor actress playing B, desperate to convince anyone, anyone, that she's an English woman.
But you would have said goodbye. Why should she? We only met her yesterday.
All right. Why care about the welfare of others?
I don't blame her for not wanting to sleep in the basement.
That's British for basement.
But mostly this movie is about one thing: creeping up and down staircases, accompanied by the score of a 40s Bugs Bunny and Elmer Fudd two-hander.
She's old. She's old. She's old. So old. Old.
Did Prokofiev do the music for this?
Yes, Ernie Prokofiev.
Look out. She's old. She creaks and pops. Let's follow the whimsical adventures of Granny. They're young. They're scared. Young and scared. Young. She's old. Look at how old she is. She creaks. She's so dang old.
Let's go have some fish and chips.
I never knew I had a basement.
She's old. She's in the basement.
Then there's a lady in a flowing gown, not unlike one of the undead brides of the Master and Manos, who is at least good for one moment in the theater.
Oh. Going uphill is hard when you're dead. Oh.
I think she's dead on her feet.
Oh.
Sorry.
The fact that this movie was shot in 10 days and took 5 years to release is evidenced in its renegade narrator, who pops up from time to time and says gross shit like this.
Making love to an 80-year-old woman in the body of a 20-year-old girl.
Much like The Creeping Terror, which we'll discuss next month, this is a case of patching holes and trying to tell a story in the editing booth that somebody didn't have the skill to tell on set. If there's one interesting tidbit about the movie, it may be that, like another movie from this season with the word brain in the title, The Brain That Wouldn't Die, it was adapted into a stage musical in the last decade. And when that's an interesting tidbit, you have failed as a filmmaker. I really have so little to say about this movie. It bores me, which is going to sound weird when we get to the next movie. I'll add that it's accompanied by a depressing little short called What About Juvenile Delinquency, about a group of teenage punks that tailgate an old man, then beat him senseless for driving too slow, only to realize he was the father of the friend they were driving to. It's a grim 10-minute slog that manages to end on a high note thanks to the name of the short's production company, Young America Films.
Young American, he was a young American. Oh!
The episode built around the movie in short is half decent, like an invention exchange where Crow impersonates Dr. Forrester and vice versa, and a truly surprising letter reading segment.
And thank you for
What's
writing
an
just a
episode?
letter to let you guys know how much I love your show. And how
you.
I especially love Tommy Gunn Servo.
Wow.
This is my favorite, and he is my favorite, and I love his songs. If I could be on the satellite of love, I would sit and talk to Tom all day long.
Ann.
Devotedly,
Sweet
Ann
Ann.
Feldstein.
Cape Ann.
Mike,
it.
who's that from?
Ann Feldstein?
Oh, yeah, Feldstein. Yep. Got a big stack of letters from Feldstein down in my locker.
That's right. I got a bunch of that from her, too. You finally got around to writing you, huh?
Well, you trollop, you tart, Ann. Oh, you teaser of
That's
bots.
Ann.
I'm sorry.
We're just
No
kidding.
offense,
We're just
Ann.
kidding.
However, for what it's worth, in its closing moments, this episode did provide me with possibly the most enjoyable detour of this entire chapter, Tango and Cash aside.
Dr. Richard Kimball is a fugitive on the run from the law. But in another part of the world, Greenacre's Hank Kimball is also on the run from the law.
Mr. Nelson, I'm on the run. Well, not actually on the run. I'm being pursued and I'm walking quickly. Yeah, you see, I'm in flight from the law. Well, not the whole law, actually just parts of the law. When I say parts, I should really say men. Not to say there aren't women in the police force. There are some women. I'm just not sure of the ratio. I'm also being followed by a one-armed man, or a man with a prosthetic arm. I'm sure he had two arms when he was born. Well, thanks very much. Good night.
Boy. Crow, buddy?
Wow.
You know, you set a stool down next to that premise and just milked it for everything it was worth.
Move.
Well, thank you very much.
Good job, McLeod.
Although half of that bit is a reference to The Fugitive, we'll be discussing that show in the chapters to come. Instead, let's turn the dial back to 1965 and venture down to Hooterville to discuss the immortal Hank Kimball and the best sitcom of the 60s, Green Acres.
Green Acres is the place to be. Farm living is the life for me. Land spreading out so far and wide. Keep Manhattan, just give me that countryside.
New York is where I'd rather stay. I get allergic smelling hay. I just adore a penthouse view. Darling, I love you, but give me Park Avenue.
The chores,
The stores,
fresh air.
Times Square.
You are my wife.
Goodbye, city life.
Green Acres, we are there.
Green Acres ran on CBS for 6 seasons and starred Eddie Albert and Eva Gabor as wealthy New York couple Oliver Wendell and Lisa Douglas, who spontaneously moved from the big city to a truly small town called Hooterville. How small? A tiny train is the only mode of transportation in or out. The population is of less than 2,000, and the state it resides in is deliberately never identified and is always inconsistent. I would put good money on my theory that the mystery of Hooterville's geographic location had to be in the back of the writers' minds of The Simpsons when they started filling out the world of Springfield. As the theme song suggests, this move is entirely Oliver's decision, and his biggest dream has always been to operate a small farm, despite a lack of any skill or applicable knowledge. His pampered, cushy wife, Lisa, opposed the move and seems to try in every episode to find an excuse to leave, but supports her husband when it truly counts. The town is made up of colorful characters like the Douglas' farmhand, Eb Dawson, who always calls Oliver Dad, two-faced salesman / con man Mr. Haney, who bilks Oliver out of every single cent that he can, the Ziffels, an elderly couple whose quote-unquote son is Arthur, a pig that everyone but Oliver can understand and is accompanied by subtitles, and my favorite, Alvy Moore as agricultural agent Hank Kimball, a man who always starts a conversation with the illusion of considerable intelligence, but always ends up devolving into digressive nonsense, even in the best of situations.
Hurt yourself?
He's been finger planting.
Finger planting.
Ain't that a kick? I'm going.
What's finger planting?
Finger planting, you know, and then I put a seed in.
Oh, well, that's one way of doing it. Not that I ever heard anybody doing it that way, but there's no law against it. At
least I don't think there's any law against it. I could check with the chief. Mr. Kimball, you know how the American Indian used to plant his crops? He used a seeding machine. Well, it wasn't really a machine. It was, well, they used to tie a bunch of squaws together, and, well, they weren't all squaws. Some of them were British soldiers they captured, and, well, they didn't capture them. Some of them...
Mr. Kimball, may I ask you a question?
Why, certainly, Mr. Douglas. That's what I'm here for.
In the hands of anyone other than creator Jay Summers, Green Acres could be your standard eccentric one-note characters delivering obvious jokes sitcom. But instead, it's a surrealist meta-whirlwind with serialized elements and continuity, telling a gradual, if not very small, story with a tone that is yet to be replicated. It's never short on charm, and it's easily one of the most unique, clever, and sweetly subversive comedies to ever air on American television, much less in the 1960s. If reruns are still on, which I wouldn't know about as I haven't watched television in years, load up your DVR, or go get it on DVD from Shout Factory. If you have yet to discover its gentle genius, you are in for a surprise. The last episode of the week is my choice for the magnum opus of the second half of Season 5, and one of the worst excuses for a movie to ever be riffed on MST3K. It's Experiment 520, 1950s, Sam Newfield directed, Robert Lippert produced, Radar's Secret Service. So little of consequence happens in this movie that it's often eclipsed in memorability by the short that precedes it, a Union Pacific Railroad finance screed about obeying level crossings called Last Clear Chance. This short follows an agitated patrolman that shows up at a family's farmhouse to terrorize their oldest son, who just acquired his driver's license, with stories of people who ended up dead because of poor attention spans, then goes on the narration warpath.
Out on the road, I could at least try to keep other people from killing themselves in their cars.
Oh, you're doing a great job.
So if the next car I stop happens to be yours...
Set a place for me at your dinner table.
Don't tell me you were only speeding a little. Only breaking the law a little.
Uh-oh.
Only doing something a little bit wrong. Save that for somebody else, brother.
Oh my God,
because
he's snapped!
I see too many little follies.
He's a bad cop on the
End up with
loose!
someone a little bit dead.
Now I'm gonna grab a little bit of lunch.
It's funny, it's heartwarming, it's sexy, it will scar you for life, and it's yet still not the most terrifying short from Union Pacific. That will come in Season 6. So, what of Radar's Secret Service? I could tell you that it features Sid Melton in yet another irritating bit part, but that's just a tidbit. I could describe the plot, which has something to do with criminals trying to steal uranium and being thwarted by the US government thanks to the then new radar technology, but I'm still not sure that's what happens. The heroes and the villains are visually indistinguishable from one another, which is a great way to remove any tension from your movie, but that's still not the weakest thing about it. Instead, I'll relay an anecdote from the Amazing Colossal Episode Guide. Apparently, during Season 2 of the show, the staff screened a copy of this movie only to be informed that it was unavailable. So, late in Season 5, when they were informed that the licensing was suddenly available, they jumped at the chance to get it before actually rewatching it. When they did finally screen it again, the general consensus in the room was, what have we done? How the hell are we going to get through this? Much like the wild, wild world of Batwoman, the writers could not find anything from the movie to actually write sketches about, so the host segments depict everything from the bot's version of Mike's 10-year high school reunion to an elaborate diorama called the Quinn Martin Nature Preserve. Solid stuff. As a movie, it clearly breaks the characters, much like the people that portray them. In the words of Dr. Forrester, who presents the movie under the new Deep Hurting brand, Hypnoheliostatic Stasis.
In your opinion, would you say we're in for a lot of standing around? Great slabs of driving? Hot dogs of talking? Oh, yes. In short, hypnoheliostatic stasis. Isn't that right, Dr. Frankie Keister?
Ja, ja, strum and drang, ja.
It's loaded with bombastic music that was clearly designed to throw you off the misery of what you're watching.
Oh, those golden grams. Oh, those golden grams.
Only Radar knows what the hell is going on.
The central heroes treat Radar as a divine magic. There are endless shots of them driving around in a frumpy Ford Studebaker with a giant sphere on the roof, as to say, "Behold, the future of civilization!" And the poor creatures in the theater hit that main vein.
Your attention, please. You will love radar. Give yourselves to it freely.
Evidence that Christ himself invented radar. I don't know. Like Moses at the rock, I had my first doubts about radar that day.
Duplicate shots with radar. Yes, thanks to radar, we've only needed to shoot 3 scenes.
It's the detector gauge. Some radar equipment just crossed the beam.
Run it down. Notify Bill immediately.
Radar! That's right, radar makes a big return. We're back on track with radar. I missed radar.
I love radar.
So little happens in this movie that at various points they give up talking and start discussing the characters of an unrelated sitcom.
This looks like where they filmed a bunch of Barnaby Jones episodes.
Speaking of Barnaby Jones, did Mr. Woodman ever have Cotter as a student?
Well, yeah, that's why they called it Welcome Back, Cotter.
Oh, that's it.
Well, was Juan Epstein Puerto Rican or Jewish?
Well, he was both. That was his whole gig.
I mean,
that was the whole...
Wow.
It was the whole gag of Epstein. Come on.
Hence the name Juan.
Juan Epstein.
Thank you.
Welcome.
You know, this movie, biggest September opening in history. Even beat out Under Siege.
Get out.
No, I won't.
Get out.
No.
Keep an eye on this thing. I'll see if I can spot the men. All right.
Now, this might be my favorite riff in the entire history of the show. And that sounds absurd, but let me explain. The way Trace as Crow replies to Mike's "Get Out" is one of the few in-theater instances of a performer transcending a puppet and becoming a person. In this moment, it feels like Mike and Trace aren't actors, just two guys forced to sit through this goddamn movie and trying to find solace and distraction. And that distraction continues.
So it was Boom Boom Washington. What did the Boom Boom stand for?
We played bass.
See, that's right. Boom Boom.
The problem is there was too much radar early. Now there's radar. I don't care. So, Mike, did you know that Horshack's name meant the cattle are dying?
Yes, I knew that.
You did?
Yes.
I know that.
I understand that I'm almost alone when it comes to adoring this episode, but I don't care. If you're looking for an experiment where the movie is hysterical and the riffs support that, don't look here. If you want to watch the MST3K gang tap dance as hard as they possibly can to make up for something that is so stunningly not worth watching with any interpretation of irony, Radar Secret Service is the best possible example. And that earlier distracted conversation actually led me on a 3-hour detour that I'm still upset about. No, I didn't bother to watch Welcome Back, Kotter. I couldn't locate a DVD copy, and if I'm being honest, I didn't actually look. Instead, I'm referring, of course, to 1992's Under Siege and its 1995 sequel, Dark Territory.
It was the final voyage of America's mightiest battleship.
What's on this helicopter?
This little sweetheart, Miss July 89.
God, I love this business. I love you.
The party was wild.
Love you to death.
They really knocked them dead. Imagine this arsenal of tactical nuclear weapons falling into the wrong hands. The Pentagon never did.
4 minutes ahead of schedule. Damn, I'm good.
Now, a team of terrorists have taken over.
Wake up the president.
But there's just one thing they didn't count on. The cook.
Are you like some special forces guy or something?
No, I'm just a cook.
Oh my god, we're gonna die.
This is not the work of a cook.
I want you to coordinate your efforts with us.
Yes, sir.
I see that you completely disobeyed my orders.
Roger that.
Ryback is an ex-SEAL. Expert in martial arts, explosives,
Stand back!
weapons and tactics.
I also cook.
The Nimitz is tracking 2 Tomahawks just launched from the Missouri.
Where are they headed?
Honolulu.
Happy trails. Steven Seagal.
I know you, don't I?
Tommy Lee Jones.
Been a long time.
I'll see you in hell, sailor boy!
Under Siege.
Believe it or not, Under Siege was actually the first Steven Seagal movie I had ever seen, and about an hour into an 103-minute runtime, I fully realized how wise I was to have avoided his oeuvre. Seagal is Casey Ryback, a cook on an about-to-be decommissioned battleship that is overtaken by mercenary terrorists, headed by an absolutely loony Tommy Lee Jones.
All of my life. Saturday morning cartoons. The best. Whoa. For example, do you remember those 2 little shrimp coming in, riding in on those 2 little seahorses with little hats, little chaps, little pistols, bam, 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 shooting back over their shoulders, rescue that lobster from the Swedish cook. Funniest thing I ever saw in my life. Splendid work, by the way. And it's splendid work. My. How hell doth quicken the spirit.
But the bad guys are about to realize that this meathead cook is actually a former Navy SEAL, and he doesn't take any shit. Ryback manages to shoot, stab, and throat rip his way from the kitchen to the surface, engaging in some fights that can be best described as action sequences, but are so unmemorable that I honestly couldn't recount a single one of them to you. The movie catapulted Seagal into a period of 4 or 5 years where he was considered an actual movie star, which baffles me. He mumbles, makes inane quips, and always feels like he either doesn't know his lines or has far too much room to improvise poorly. It doesn't help that he's playing another derivative version of John McClane, which was a misguided requirement in every action movie of the 90s, but had never been properly duplicated in any movie outside of Die Hard, and I'm counting every Die Hard sequel in that assessment.
A top-secret satellite with nuclear capabilities. A team of international terrorists. A government-held hostage.
President and the others been safely evacuated.
An undetectable moving headquarters.
I'd like to call your attention to the highly trained men with the automatic weapons they may be called upon to shoot you.
There's only one problem.
Any other heroes?
The cook from Under Siege is back.
I'm not even a good cook, but there are some things I'm good at.
And things are really heating up.
That's the 45, okay?
Yeah. Last time, he rocked the boat. This time, the sky's the limit. Steven Seagal. Under Siege 2, Dark Territory.
This I'm trained for.
3 years after Die Hard on a Battleship, Warner Brothers still felt that there was more money to be milked from the generic Seagal-style action, which explains the release of Die Hard on a Train, where Casey Ryback is simply a retired restaurant owner taking a train with his niece from Denver to Los Angeles to attend his brother's funeral. And just like the same rote plot that would plague John McClane in every sequel, wouldn't you know it, that train just so happens to harbor techno-terrorists hell-bent on blowing up a nuclear reactor underneath the Pentagon or some shit. The terrorists are led by unthreatening playwright Eric Bogosian, who delivers a performance that strains credibility harder than Seagal trying to be charming, and is given pop culture-laden dialogue that instantly makes you reach for the fast-forward button.
You're traveling through another dimension, a dimension not only of sight and sound, but of mind. That's a signpost up ahead. Your next stop, Dark Territory.
Fuck you, movie. I can give Under Siege 2 one bit of praise, however. Now that I've seen it, I never need to watch another Steven Seagal movie for as long as I live. I did it. I'm out. And I'm never going to look back. And that is where we end Act 3 of this chapter of the Coolness Chronicles. Next week brings the conclusion, Act 4, naturally, where we'll try to find a decent movie centering around Santa Claus, visit with some homicidal youth on a teenage crime wave, and examine the lunar equivalent of 12 Angry Men. All that and much, much more as we continue to chart the history and legacy of Mystery Science Theater 3000. Thank you to everyone involved in making MST3K for everything that they've contributed to my life and culture as a whole. Double thanks for writing the episode guide that I will quote frequently in this season of the pod. I also want to thank Shout Factory for their excellent supplemental material that was invaluable to my research for this and every episode to follow on this subject. If you want to support the artists who made this wonderful show, many episodes are available on VOD at rifftracks.com. And thank you for listening. If you enjoy what you hear, please rate and review the show on iTunes or your chosen source. Share it with anyone you can, any way you can. This has been the largest and most fulfilling endeavor I've ever seen to completion, and it would be nice to keep making the show until it just isn't fun anymore. Have questions, comments, or random recommendations, or is there anything I missed in this particular chapter? Contact me on Twitter at CoolnessPodRyan or on our Facebook page, and keep on the lookout for updates. Until next week, do what you love, don't be a dick, and as always...
Way more prefer Bon Jovi or some singer going, "Do you people like rock and roll out there?" rather than, "This song is about people in Nicaragua. Stop smiling!"
Coolness Chronicles is written, produced, and edited by Ryan Rodriguez. Executive producers are Tracy Rodriguez and Luis Rodriguez. Original music by Bildschirm. Please visit bildschirm.bandcamp.com for more information.